I really appreciate the way you guys brought some really innovative things together. And I think that if we can get to a point where the memory in this systems let us do our own VMs where we control the performance better, no matter what hardware it's on, the stuff that you brought will be like underpinnings of allowing us to do this same experience anywhere and even customize it based on the performance of the hardware we're on. Not what they made, but what we enable and hack and put in there. My question is, what are some of the pieces that are still out there that you can optimize performance on? Because I know with threads and like a good SSD compiler, like the Twitter guys are going to have to kick their butt and make them launch out and make open source. We can manage most of the problems. What are some of the pieces that are still out there that are really limiting performance or things you want to do?
I mean, I think I have a kind of a non-answer to that question, but that question sort of raises for me from the perspective that I have, which is it'd be nice if the problems we were facing were performance problems, but I think the real problems that are facing this particular group of people and these technologies are the content production pipeline. Like, it's actually really, really expensive and really hard to produce immersive 3D content today. And at Google I/O, they demoed this thing they call AR Animals, and there's like a huge gallery they made that Google paid for of these really cool animated and with sound 3D animals. And the most expensive, and anyone want to guess, like the tiger is the most expensive, but anyone want to guess like how much it cost?
$3 million?
No, not quite that. Yeah, it was $35K. It's like a really expensive model, and it's, you know, it's nice, but it's not like the most amazing, gonna blow your socks off thing. It's, you know, it's a 3D model that'll render nicely on the web, and normal people can't do that, and normal people can't just like pick up the design skills necessary to make their own content. So I think building the pipelines that are actually going to get this content in front of eyeballs is actually the harder problem, not just legit. Performance.
Yeah. Anyone else?
Yeah. You actually found your answer. Is the limiting factor is human performance to produce 3D content. So we have to optimize for that.
Anyone else? Anything else? Cool. All right. Great.
Great. I'm so glad it came tonight. Thanks, all of you. My question is for the person that doesn't have the deep pockets, the one that can only afford cardboard, and looking at regular web developers that want to be part of this and to open up that big audience that hasn't yet tapped in, because they're not the game players, they're the people that use it for all different kinds of things. So my question is rather twofold. From the browser manufacturers, when they're going to allow gaze to be a user-defined gesture. That's for Safari's not here, but Mozilla, Firefox and Chrome might be. And then the other question is how you enable debugging for browser content on a laptop or whatever. But everything I saw here so far this evening was involving Oculus or Rift, some kind of device. But realistically, I think the floodgates are going to be open once you tap into the very large 1 billion plus that have the device that don't want to download apps.
So addressing the debugging bit, if you're talking about cardboard, then typically that's done through your mobile device. It's either Android or iOS. Most Android phones, if you're working with like Chrome, then you can do the exact same kind of debugging that I was showing at the podium, where you plug it in and say, hey, I want to inspect the connected devices. And
sorry, not Android. Everything we've seen so far, Google, I love Google, but everything is really biased towards Android, so I'm looking for the broader sets, especially Safari, because that's what killed Flash, and if you don't support iOS, it's going to kill whatever.
So on iOS, there is a very similar capability. You generally have to be using Safari because everything stays within Apple's ecosystem. And outside of that, I'm not, is Windows Phone really a thing anymore? I don't think so. But and beyond just the Chrome browser, Firefox has very similar debugging capabilities. We don't have time to show them all off on stage, and as a Google employee, I tend to show off the Google stuff. But it is definitely not something that is reserved just for Chrome developers who are just using Google devices, so on.
I've just add Safari. Actually, I was really delighted to discover has a really nice canvas debugger in their dev tools, nicer than anything that's in Chrome. And I believe Firefox still has this. It has like a nice shader debugger. So I definitely think there's a lot of nice low-hanging fruit that's been added to the dev tools that are non-Chrome.
Yeah. And Control-Alt-I, I really want to get that on my iPhone.
Yeah. Actually, we are in the business of making like easy-to-use tools, so standalone headsets are a step forward in convenience for users, but from the point of view of developers, I think they make things a bit harder. So, yeah, we need like easier tools so we can iterate. But the magic of the web is that you can test in a Rift, you can develop on a Rift, and then it will work on any 6DOF headsets.
Also, for your point on us just being focused on like Google devices, the demo I just showed was actually on my iPhone, and just before this, I was in the back using the Safari debugger, so it was awesome.
Yeah. Thanks. No, I just most of the tools I see are always are more Android based, and I appreciate that. But thank you.
Hello, my name is Suyash. I do a lot of UI UX development. My question is, I have 3 questions. One, that guy's question reminded me of Safari. Will the WebXR APIs going to be supported on the Safari as well, and including the element that you were showing, the model viewer, and when? And second question is regarding, let's say, performance or use cases. What would be a good use case for building a native experience for AR or VR, like a native or Unity, versus using web technology? Because if I want to build something and I go back to my company or my client or whoever, right, they will ask like, why you're doing this way versus this way. So can you give us some insights into that?
Yeah, I'll answer the first part of your question. As far as Apple goes, nobody up here can speak for Apple, unfortunately. And Apple doesn't speak for Apple until they want to. And so we will find out that Apple supports WebXR the day that they support it, pretty much. I will, however, say that they have been participating in the community group and it hasn't been a super active participation, but they have given us some very valuable feedback. Some of it along the lines of, we really would like you to change this for privacy reasons, or else we won't be allowed to implement it in the future. So it is definitely something that has been on the minds of some of the engineers there. I just can't speak to any timelines for them. As far as content goes, I'll let you guys take it.
Yeah, I just wanted to say about Model Viewer, we test for compatibility back to IE11, and we support all major browsers for the last 2 major versions.
Yeah, that's the same for A-Frame. IE11 support
Cool.
any browser, any platform.
As to your question about like native versus web technology, I mentioned this briefly in my talk, but using web technology enables you to update your AR content separately without requiring an in-app update. So this is really important in cases like, this is just one example, but say you're the New York Times app and you want to start showing AR experiences for the user so that they can put the latest NASA technology in their living room and look at it and see how big it is in real life and real size. They can do that, and they can keep up with the most recent news and products with AR content being uploaded on the fly using web. But if you're a native app and using this completely using native technologies, every time you updated your AR content, the user would have to update their app to actually see that.
One thing I forgot to mention really quick is that we do have a Polyfill for the WebXR, we are working on a Polyfill for the WebXR API. It's been in various states of functionality over the last little bit. And that would allow us to provide at least basic cardboard level functionality on iOS devices.
My question is initially about A-Frame, but it could have, the other panelists may have also content they wanted to explain. So we all would like to have create web pages with dynamic elements. For example, let's say we have a 3D scene and with A-frame, and we'd like to have like a button, and you click it, and it would add like a new animal or graphic. You would be adding a new A entity tag to the web page. What is going on behind the scenes with the A-frame when you actually add a new element? Is it an observer pattern where it observes the DOM and then it then compiles this into a 3JS WebGL graphic? What is A-frame doing? Let's say if you dynamically added a new A-frame entity tag to a web page.
So the way we use the custom elements API. So you document create element a entity, and it's gonna give you a new element, and we register those elements. So we listen to the lifecycle callbacks of the custom elements API, and when those we can detect when a new element is created, and in the callback we can instantiate like an object 3D from 3JS and instantiates all the components associated to that entity, and each component does initialize different things. It does user code. So that's how it works.
And as a developer, do you just have to test this out in real life to see how well the performance is before you actually would want? In other words, how long would there be obviously if you put a large graphic on the page, there's going to be a sizable lag for it to be re-rendered.
I think A-frame doesn't add like any overhead. If you are gonna load a big model within a specific element, the performance issues are gonna come from that model. How complex it is, how big the textures are, and they have to be uploaded to the GPU. I think it's a more general question than A-frame itself. It's like,
Right.
If you wanna load big assets into your web page, what's the best way to do it? Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's what I thought they could answer too.
Yeah, I would just add, so Model Viewer is based on the same fundamental technology as A-frame, the web components API, including custom elements. And yeah, the overhead from custom elements is pretty negligible. It really is like if you have a 30 megabyte model that you're trying to render, that's going to take quite a bit of time. It's going to make the rest of the work pale in comparison.
So do you do like in React, you can do server-side rendering? Is there some way of doing that with A-frame or these other technologies?
I mean, you have to load 30 megabytes over the network, and you have to upload whatever to the GPU, right? There's no way to do that on the server, no matter what technology you're doing.
Second person from your right, you talked about a native layer and then a VR layer that you have in your application. Native, what's really going on as opposed to what you're implanting into the image. I don't know if you all have that or you had mentioned something about that. Yeah.
Sorry, what was the question?
Wondering if I can implant data from, say, metal fatigue or behavior of materials under certain conditions so I can actually implant, so I can see what's really going on in the object as opposed to advertising material, really structural data or material failures or what have you that I can put into an object, to a web image.
Yeah, so basically you can render anything you want in that transparent web view layer on top of the real world.
Does it matter of a database or a library or what?
That comes out of whatever you decide to. So you're in control of that web view. You can develop it just like any web page.
What if it's streaming data? What if it's streaming data based on, I'm looking at this metal in a bridge and I'm looking at how it's behaving over time, say a couple hours, and the data is streaming in, and then that some kind of interface is telling me how that metal is behaving? I could do that?
Yeah.
And is it not just your application, but everybody else's application? I could expand that?
Yeah, so one of the things that's difficult to communicate, and it's especially difficult, I think, for us because we all live and breathe this stuff, and so there's certain concepts that are baked into our heads that we don't always realize communicate well to the outside world. But there is the layer of what the platform is providing to you, in this case the web, like what the underlying APIs are, and then there's a whole nother layer of what the various different libraries provides. So, for example, what I'm talking about is WebXR. It's a web API. It's like one of the lowest level things you can do on the web, whereas what Diego's generally talking about is a library that sits on top of those web APIs, and then the model tag and the sorry, I am blanking right now. The native, the AR view, they all kind of sit somewhere on that spectrum, and so the underlying APIs are usually very content neutral. They provide very, very low level primitives to allow you to do whatever you want. They just don't make it easy. The higher level APIs usually are aimed at making things easier, but they're typically more opinionated about what kind of content they make easy. And so it is usually a balance of finding the right libraries that support the type of data that you're looking at working with. And the web can, the answer for can the web do it is almost always yes. It's just a question of how much pain are you willing to go through to make that happen.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, so for example, if you have an application that needs streaming data, and this is, kind of orthogonal to the subject matter of the evening, but there's WebSockets, for example, that would allow you to get streaming network data in real time. And if you built an application that had nothing to do with VR or AR or 3D that took advantage of WebSockets on the web to render some data in real time, whatever the application, then in theory you could take that same data and visualize it using AR WebView on top of.
The whole idea is getting some person to be looking at some machine or so forth. He's got the VR on, he's getting the streaming data, what the material is that's being used to make these things, and under these conditions, this is the failure rate that's being predicted, this is what we should be seeing as far as structure. I could do that on a real-time, well, close to real-time basis. All right, thank you.
Yeah, I was thinking of some of design UX problems, and I have a design question for you guys. So you mentioned the cost of building a 3D model, $35,000 somebody paid. I should have made that for Google, but anyways, my question is, what is the use cases for we are, like she showed a cool demo, and I see so many on my Twitter feed, people doing like AR, I say gimmicks, a lot of the AR cool stuff, right? And imagine the future where you go to your favorite, let's say, news site, and everything you're seeing is like AR or VR 3D, right? Recently, there was a discussion on Hacker News. John Carmack wrote a blog post about 2D UI versus 3D UI. And there was a lot of debate about, he's working on Oculus, and he's in 3D all the time, but he's really actually talking about use cases of 2D. So from your point of view, what would be the future of the web? Where would experiences like AR, like some of the ones you showed, where you can see this object, and where would 3D fit in the web world? And what's a good use cases for 2D? Or we can extend that to AR and VR. Like, would all the websites become 3D, and we're in the, or what if some people don't like that 3D experience? What are your design thoughts, UX thoughts?
I'll go while they're collecting their thoughts. I really loved the post that John Carmack made about this topic because it mirrors my own experience very closely. And it's advice that I think a lot of developers are coming around to. We're going to have to go through a learning period for all of this because this is all fairly new technology. And if you remember back to the early days of the iPhone, everything was like wood textures and looked like physical notebooks that you were tearing pages off of, and it was all just kind of terrible. But we're collectively going through this learning experience about how do we interact with this new platform, and that's what we're seeing today. Because the new capability that we have is volumetric data, people go way overboard with it, and you get these crazy Star Trek holographic interfaces that are just not very usable. I expect that we're going to see something a lot more like what Carmack was talking about, where predominantly when we're just reading text or interacting with basic UI, that is largely going to be 2D. I would expect that the web in VR is going to look an awful lot like the web that's not in VR, in that you're going to have large pages of text that the primary difference is probably you've got a lot more flexibility about how large it appears and you know how many windows you have around you and whatnot, but it's still going to fundamentally be a 2D experience. And then I think you're going to see pops and you know specific instances of volumetric data scattered throughout that, like with the model tag, where you could be scrolling through a page and have, you know, the Wikipedia article for a tiger have the $35,000 tiger in an embedded tag that as you're scrolling up and down, you can actually see that that like is something that's like a little diorama inside the page. It's actually got its own space that it occupies. It's 3D. Maybe you can reach in and pull it out, because that actually has some value in being a volumetric thing, especially if you can show it at scale. But there's no reason that you should do the text as anything other than a flat surface, because that is what we as humans know. Even though we live in a 2D or a 3D world, we still consume most of our information on 2D surfaces, and that's not going to change.
Yeah, I think that's my prediction for what Apple is going to do. But I don't know. I think when Apple gets into AR and VR, your phone is going to be still an important part of it. So imagine, I would love to use my phone in VR. I have my VR headset. I'm being able to pull my phone, and there's some UI that is projected by the headset, but still, I can touch the screen and scroll using the usual interactions I do with my phone. So yeah, I believe.
So you feel the VR should be all 3D?
Excuse me? I mean, 2D UIs are going to remain 2D, is what I mean.
And in VR, everything will
And in
be
VR, they will
2D.
remain 2D. But right now in VR, you lose the tactility, the tactile feedback that a phone or a tablet or a computer has. And I would like to use those objects within VR. That's what I mean. But the UI itself remains 2D.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time thinking about, you know, a ton of the use cases on the web today are all around e-commerce, and a big part of how 3D is going to start to land on the web is going to be shopping experiences, going online to see the products you're thinking about buying, like in a more immersive context. And when I think about, like, oh, I'm going to check out this car and put it in my garage, and it's going to be really immersive. I want to walk around it. When I think about the experience I'm crafting for a user in that context, I don't want letters and individual words flying around and, like, you know, totally discombobulating them. Like, a person who cares to get a contextual experience about, like, what makes up this car's dashboard, or, you know, what material are the wheels made out of, or whatever information they care about, they're going to want 2D content laid out in a very reasonable, easy to read way. And the cool thing about the web is it's already really good at doing that. Like, people have spent decades perfecting the technology for 2D layout and arrangement, and also things like animation and all this other stuff. And the future of all of this immersive content is really going to be marrying that type of layout with the immersive content like 3D models.
I think also because all of us up here have been working a lot on the web, we're all a little biased towards 2D UIs. And then something that hasn't been mentioned yet is something called 2.5D, where you have 2D content in the real world. This is predominantly in AR. So for example, if you're using a recipe on your kitchen table, you can have that flat surface left there, versus like behind you on the fridge is another 2D plane where you have your grocery shopping list. And at your desk in your room, you have all these tabs open that are also 2D planes. Yeah.
In answering my previous question about dynamic image addition to your elements, all of you spoke to the bottleneck is that they're in loading the 3D models and processing them. Is there, or is anyone using, or is there any feasibility in offloading any of this processing to web service workers? Are you currently using that?
So, excuse me, swallowed a bug or something. That again is going to be part of the libraries. There is a lot of opportunity for that, and there's some really good libraries that are fairly recent that would make great use of that. So with the model tag, the primary format that it interacts with is called GLTF, and it's a Chronos standard. It's built to be really easily consumable by the web, but one of the extensions that we have for that is something called Draco, which was developed by a team that's now at Google. And it does geometry compression. So the actual, bits of the model that you're getting it's all just, numbers. It's vectors in space. And Draco goes and takes that and crunches it down pretty significantly. Now, when you get that, that reduces its size over the wire, but you still need to decompress it to actually push it to your GPU. And that process is something that is very well suited to a web worker. And there's some technicalities about, it's more difficult than it should be to interact with the graphics context in a web worker, but you can still do a decompression like that and then send it over the worker boundary and hand it off to the GPU. That works really well. Also, I am excited about this. This just happened this last week. There's a new texture format that's been going around called Basis, and it's developed by a company called Binomial. And just this week they announced a deal with Google to open source their library, and they do the exact same thing that I was talking about with Draco, but for textures, where they crunch them down to a really small size. It's about the size of a JPEG, send them over the wire, and there is a decode step again that ideally would happen in something like a worker, but then that gets handed off to the GPU as well. And in that case, the data actually can stay compressed to a certain degree on the GPU, which makes transferring it to there smaller. It helps render it faster, and it allows you to use larger textures without so much of a memory hit. So there are definitely tools either in place or coming out that will allow for exactly what you're talking about.
So what time frame do you think this will happen?
Basis is out now. And there is examples on the web of how you use it in a worker to decode, exactly like I was saying. When it will become part of some of the more popular toolkits is up in the air. I know 3JS just added support for loading it this last week, and I think that Babylon.js is also working on support for it. So it's there and available, but it may not be integrated with your specific toolkits just yet.
I just wanted to add that Model Viewer currently does not run in Worker. However, we have plans and a pathway to move a lot of the work, both network work and rendering work, into a worker.
All right, thank you. I guess Mama here is it kind of intersects IoT along with this. Does the APIs include for other senses? Because you've been obviously visual is very heavily involved. Auditory I can see by both mic and speaker. Very, very briefly touched on haptics, sense of touch, but you'd need another device to do like scent and stuff like that to really truly be immersive. So is there in the API any method for if you have a peripheral that can provide that, for example? So proprioception also is clearly possible from moving around in space, but we're interested in taste and scent.
Yeah. There are no APIs, to my knowledge, for taste and scent on the web, and when they do come around, I will not be the one to build them because there's just too much danger involved. I will not be blamed for the things that you taste.
You don't want a smell observer API?
No, I really don't.
So, yeah.
That sounds like a horrible thing to have to debug.
Need sensors.
Why does everything smell like strawberries?
Strawberries is not the failure case that I was concerned about.
If I could say one other is how well is security baked into this? Because security is getting more and more important. I mean, look at Baltimore's being held hostage, the city of Baltimore. So, I mean, everything needs to be secure today, and everything should be bulletproof before coming out into actual mass production. So.
One of the things I can say about the WebXR API is, and I can only really speak for the Chrome team here, but we're making sure that any interaction that we do with the native hardware is happening in a sandboxed a sandbox process, much the same as we already do with GPUs or any of the native OS implementations. So a lot of the same security models that we already see on the web that are designed to allow you to browse confidently and know that individual web pages aren't going to just randomly take over your computer and start mining Bitcoin. That all applies to the immersive web as well. We're being very conscious about making sure that we're upholding the same level of security that the web is already known for.
Just tapping on the previous, there's been a massive focus on vaporized organic compounds in the chemical environment and therefore getting to taste and sense. So yeah, it would be wonderful if we get some APIs out there. On another level, have you ever thought of offering some financial incentives for some hackathons where at Harvard Med School, we used to do this thing where we get the medical students, and after the first week, you throw them in to see the patient, scared the hell out of them. Really, these people were terrified. The doctors were terrified. But having a sort of VR, and you sort of see the patient, and then it's instructing you on what to go through and what you would see and how would you diagnose this, that'd be a wonderful tool. Just even if you just get somebody to work on a hackathon over the years and throwing in financial incentives, it's very much needed. Because your doctor sees you for, what, less than 10 minutes, which is not enough. And some of the conditions you're seeing, we're now seeing tropical diseases in the United States. If you could get some people to put some money together towards something like that, it'd be wonderful. And if you need some suggested sources, I could tell you. Just to throw that up as a toss.
I mean, I don't know about hackathons, but I know of several startups working on that space already. There's people like putting effort, like for pain mitigation for kids in surgery procedures, like surgeon training. Yeah, so there's people working on it. I don't know.
Could be an interesting thing we can take a look at from like a developer relations perspective. Right.
I don't want to over-rotate on smell APIs, but it just occurred to me there are some actually pretty cool web APIs that have come out recently for peripherals. So like web USB and web Bluetooth might be interesting ways to sort of get what you're going for without necessarily landing a specific API in the web platform. And these are APIs around connecting external devices and accessing them through web applications.
Okay. Thank you.
Great. Well, thanks for all the great questions, and another big round of applause for the speakers.